از سرکار خانم دکتر فرهام خیلی سپاسگزاریم. اگر سوالی نیست که
خودشون همه کار
ارائه دهنده دوم رو بنده معرفی کنم.
خیلی ممنون.
Thank you.
And bye.
So thank you very much. The next presentation, the next lecture is going to be given by Dr. Hassani, Probability and Fuzzy Logic in Translation Studies, the case of Toury's laws of translation. Dr. Qudrat Hassani has a PhD in Translation Studies from Allame Tabatabai University and is an assistant professor at Daman University. He is published in Meta and Targets. In their co-authored Target paper, Hassani and Blondzinski 2019 have presented a meta-theoretical model for translation studies based on fuzzy logic and multi-dimensionality. Their model addresses the deficiencies inherent in dichotomous and continuum-based translation theories. Among others, Hassani's areas of interest are translation theories, models of translation, translation and technology, and corpus studies. His primary goal is to train a generation of translators on a par with world-class professionals in the global market. So thank you very much, Dr. Hassani. Now we're going to have your lecture. Thank you very much.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Sure.
So, how are you?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you all for attending my virtual presentation, and I wish we could actually meet up in person so that we could have a more productive exchange of ideas. But anyway, that is how things are these days, and it is due to the COVID-19 pandemic. As you can see, the topic of my presentation is...
I'm sorry, Dr. Hassani, would you please, if it's possible, share your webcam, or if it is possible for you?
Okay, I haven't shared anything, right?
Your PowerPoint is right now shared by the webcam.
So, is that okay? Can you see me now?
It's okay, thank you very much. It's okay.
Perfect. So, as you can see, the topic of my presentation is probability and fuzzy logic in translation studies, the case of Toury's laws of translation. You can easily detect at least 3 keywords in this topic, and these keywords are probability, fuzzy logic, and Toury's laws of translation, not to mention translation studies itself. You know, none of these topics can be adequately addressed in a matter of a 15-minute presentation, but anyway, I will try my best to do as much justice to these topics as humanly and, of course, temporarily possible. So, let me move to my second. All right. You know, I'm sorry, I just don't know how to handle this because the formatting has actually changed. So, yeah, that's perfect. I'm really sorry because I thought I would use my own presentation, okay, the PowerPoint that I had prepared. Anyway, I have been working on this topic for about 10 years. I was reading an article about translation studies, and I serendipitously came across the topic of fuzzy logic. You know, back then, I really had no idea about it. And, the very concept actually piqued my interest, and I wanted to explore it more. And when I got familiar with this topic more intimately, I thought it would definitely have some potential for translation studies. And I was really interested to know what implications the application of fuzzy logic would actually have into translation studies. You know, I realized that fuzzy logic had already been applied to many sciences, ranging from hard sciences like engineering, chemistry, physics, to soft sciences and humanities like linguistics, psychology, and literature. But I couldn't find any application of fuzzy logic into translation studies, and much to my disappointment, there was little mention of this theoretical concept in translation studies. And I was wondering, how come this concept, I mean, the theoretical paradigm could happen applied to some fields like linguistics and literature, but it hadn't been applied to translation studies. You know, in my search, I found that probability was to some extent to blame. You know, some scholars believe that probability had been incorporated and integrated to some theories of translation studies, and it had been seen in Toury's laws of translation. And some believe that probability was the same as fuzzy logic, and what could be said by fuzzy logic had already been said by probability, and that's why they resisted the introduction of fuzzy logic into translation studies. So in order to understand the reason why it was not introduced into translation studies, or it was introduced into translation studies later than into any other studies, it would be a good idea to have at least some rough understanding of the major concepts of fuzzy logic and probability. Yeah, you know, I would start with a scenario. Just think of a coin. You want to flip a coin, and before you flip it, you really have no idea if that coin will land heads or tails. But once it has landed, it is either heads or tails. You know, before that, you're uncertain about the final outcome, and you really have no idea if it would land heads or tails. But once it lands, it is either this or that. It is either heads or tails. But it's not the case in fuzzy logic. Fuzzy logic works differently. You know, for example, just imagine I'm talking about my belongings. My belongings and possessions are worth 2 billion 2 months. I ask you if I'm rich or poor. You can say you're both rich and poor, depending on who you're comparing yourself to. For example, if I'm comparing myself to some rich business people, I'm definitely a poor person. But if I'm comparing myself to somebody whose belongings aren't actually worth 1 billion 2 months, I'm a rich person. So depending on the situation, I can be both rich and poor. So that's why, you know, no matter how much and how accurate and how precise you are in your measurement of things, this element of uncertainty still remains in the situation. Or let me extend this situation or this example to the field of translation studies. You know, you submit an article for presentation, let's say at Birjan conference, and you really have no idea if it will be accepted for presentation or it will be rejected. But once the review process is done, it is either accepted for presentation or it is rejected. So it's an either or question. Either it gets accepted for presentation or it gets rejected. So, you know, once something happens, you're certain about the situation and there is no uncertainty. You know, this uncertainty goes away as if by magic. But that's not the case in fuzzy logic. Now, let's say, for example, I have done a translation and I have asked Dr. Rezaian to rate this translation on a scale from 1 to 10. And he tries to do his best in order to be as fair as possible. And he rates it 7. And I'm asking, is this translation a good translation or bad translation? Of course, it is both good and bad. So no matter how accurate and precise Dr. Rezaian might be, there is still an element of uncertainty in his rating. Because, you know, by nature, it's a fuzzy concept. You know, there is an element of indeterminacy and an element of uncertainty in this situation. So I guess this can set the scene for Toury's laws of translation. You know, Toury, as we all know, because we are running out of time, I would try to give you a very quick overview of this known concept in translation studies. He formulated and proposed two laws for translation studies. One was the law of growing standardization, and the other one was the law of interference. According to the first law, you know, any translation tends to comply with the textual patternings of the target text. So this law, the law of growing standardization, is mostly target oriented. But on the other hand, the law of interference, according to this law, any text tends to borrow some structures from the source text. So as you can see, one is target oriented and the other one is source oriented, and there is a contradiction between these two laws. But he also argues that these two laws can happen at the same time. You can see these two laws holding true at the same time in one single translation. So, but the problem is that the theoretical paradigm he had chosen in order to formulate these laws is paradigm, is probability. I'm really sorry for it. Is probability. By this, he has formulated these two laws, but the problem is that because he has used probability, these two contradictory laws cannot be accommodated and cannot be actually used, and these two laws cannot happen at the same time. And that's why there is something wrong with this contradiction. If he uses probability, he cannot use these two contradictory laws at the same time. So, but the problem is that in practice, we can see these contradictory laws happening at the same time in one single translation. And what's wrong with Toury's act is that he had chosen the wrong weapon and the wrong theoretical tool in order to propose his two laws of translation. If he had chosen fuzzy logic, it would be right. There wouldn't be anything wrong with his laws of translation. So in fact, there is nothing wrong with the contradiction in his laws. What is wrong is the tool that he had chosen in order to formulate his two laws of translation. And because of the shortage of time, I guess I should actually skip some parts which are known to pretty much everybody who is familiar with translation studies. So I guess by now it should be clear how probability is different from fuzzy logic. Probability concerns with the likelihood of outcomes. For example, how likely is it for something to be true or false? It is either this or that. But in fuzzy logic, we are talking about degrees of truth. We are not talking about one certain value. For example, in fuzzy logic, things are not either 0 or 1. We have degrees of truth. The values can range from 0 to 1. And in probability, when we see the outcome, the situation is certain, because this element of uncertainty goes away after we have the outcome. But in fuzzy logic, that's not the case. The outcome does not affect this indeterministic quality. And in probability, we can talk about situations whose nature admits of an either-or classification, but fuzzy logic is suited for situations which are actually inherently imprecise and resistant to sharp demarcation, no matter how precise our measurement of that situation is. And there are, of course, some more differences between probability and fuzzy logic. In probability, we are concerned with the question of whether something is the case or not. But in fuzzy logic, we are mostly concerned with how much of something is in something else. For example, somebody is poor to some extent, and that person is rich to some extent too. In probability, the law of non-contradiction, or the law of the excluded middle, holds true. It means that according to the laws of probability, two contradictory things cannot be accommodated and cannot happen at the same time, but that's not the case in fuzzy logic. And the last difference is that in probability, probability is basically no different from the binary classic logic or from the binary Aristotelian logic. But fuzzy logic is an extension of the binary logic that increases intermediate truth values. And as I pointed out earlier, unfortunately, probability and fuzzy logic have been used interchangeably, and there has been some confusion surrounding these two concepts. For example, Toury himself argues that essentialist statements would not yield satisfactory laws because they offer either or choices. As you can see from this statement, his understanding is that probability is different from essentialism, but in practice they are the same. Then he proposes that the nature of translational laws should be probabilistic as opposed to either or. So you can see the source of this actually confusion. And Pim being Pim, as usual, he argues against the mainstream ideas in translation studies. And while Toury comes in for a lot of criticism because of the contradiction in his laws, Pim actually defends him, and his defense of the contradiction in Toury's laws goes like this. The main point is that due to these probabilistic formulations, it becomes quite reasonable to have contradictory tendencies on the level of linguistic variables. So, as you can see, again, there is nothing wrong with the contradiction. What's wrong is that Toury has chosen the wrong theoretical paradigm in order to formulate his laws of translation. And we have also done a case study, and in this case study, of course, it's going to take me too much time in order to explain it, but I have actually applied this concept into a case study of a translation of a book. It is about Duma's 2003 book, Funny in Farsi, which has been translated by Soleimaninia, and I have applied Lambert and Van Gogh's methodology into it, and I have shown that it is possible for a certain translation to have and to feature both laws at the same time, and I have actually concluded that there is nothing wrong with the contradiction. What's wrong actually is the theoretical paradigm that Mr. Toury has actually chosen in order to formulate his laws of translation. And I guess that's about it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hassani. It was a very informative and well organized and well concluded presentation. Thank you very much. I see here, and there are some questions or maybe comments by Dr. Farhang Far. You may see them in the chat box, and you may want to explain. Or if there is any other question.
Is there a possibility to model the event based upon logistic regression as the response variable is in a binary nature? I'm really sorry. I really have no idea about logistic regression, and it is totally new to me. So I'm not right person to answer this question. I'm really sorry for it. Dr. Farhang Far, I'm really sorry for it. I cannot answer this question because I'm not eligible.
Thank you very much. So if there is any other question, if there are any other questions, شرکت‌کنندگان عزیز اگر سوالی دارید، خانم دکتر فرهزاد سوالی دارن بفرمایید، در خدمت هستید.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, آقای دکتر حسنی.
خواهش می‌کنم خانم دکتر.
What I wish to ask you is whether or not you're basically concerned with the product of translation, with the text and with the concept of the relation between any source and any of its possible target text when you're speaking of fuzzy logic, or are you concerned with maybe the process of translation? Well, to me, it seems that you're basically concerned with the product, with the text. Am I right in my understanding?
Of course, maybe the extent to which I have applied fuzzy logic has been the product of translation. But of course, because fuzzy logic is mostly an area of cognitive linguistics, and it has been borrowed from cognitive linguistics into some other fields like translation studies, we can say that it can also be applied to the process of translation. But because there has been little work done on this field, there is still a lot of room for its improvement, and it can be applied to some other areas of translation. what I have done actually mostly concerns the product of translation, but there is no reason for it not to be applied to the process of translation, because as I told you, it is a concept mainly formulated in cognitive linguistics, and because the process of translation is mostly concerned with cognitive processes, so it seems reasonable for a scholar or a researcher to apply it into the process of translation as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
So, thank you very much. Any other question? بسیار خوب. خیلی ممنون آقای دکتر حسنی گرامی و سرکار خانم دکتر فرهزاد گرامی. خیلی متشکرم هستم. اگر که اجازه می‌فرمایید که نشست رو ادامه بدیم اگر سوالی نیست. خیلی ممنون.
خواهش می‌کنم. ممنونم از وقتی که در اختیار من گذاشتید. متشکرم.
نه جناب عالی، خواهش می‌کنم. بله. صرفاً ارائه این نشست با عنوان شرح سروده نقطه پیوند مترجم و مترجم، مطالعه موردی شعر محمد رضا شفیعی کدکنی و عبدالوهاب البیاتی رو آقای دکتر ابراهیم محمدی و سرکار خانم بهارت ولی‌نیا ارائه خواهند فرمود. آقای دکتر محمدی دانشیار ادبیات تطبیقی دانشگاه بیرجند هستند و ازشون میخوام که ارائه خودشون رو آغاز بفرمایند.